Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Supernatural as well as the latest episode of Legacies. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Supernatural, you can skip to what I say about this week's episode of Legacies. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Supernatural. A lot of interesting things about this episode when you need to break down. First and foremost, you have Jack being left behind on a hunt that Sam and Dean are going, and obviously Dean lies to Jack being like, oh, we just want you to stick behind. It's like, because he doesn't want to hurt Jack's feelings, so it kind of gives him this long list of stuff to get. We'll kind of tie back into that, but obviously it's kind of very interesting monster they go up against. What is it again? I'm blanking on the thing's name already. But the monster in this episode was really kind of interesting because it turns out it was actually just a normal dude at one point in time, but he went all cannibal. But then, he got cursed by, a tribe, and they were just kind of for crimes against their people. Rather than killing him, he got turned into a monster. And there's warnings all over the forest and trees and stuff like that because he's bound to those specific spot in the forest and stuff in the woods. But the fact is, it's that thing of as time goes by, what was once truth fades and becomes either a story or a fairy tale or folklore or myth at that point in time. So it's kind of an interesting thing, which that in itself is kind of an interesting topic. It's interesting because the actor who plays the sheriff is Adam Beach, which way back, I say way back in the day, but it was over 10 years ago. He was on Law and Order SVU for a while. I think the most recent thing I've seen him in was him in Suicide Squad. He was Slipknot. I think that's his character's name. Other than that, you've seen him pop up and stuff from time to time, but that was pretty dope, which is just interesting because it's Suicide Squad, Warner Brothers, this whole situation, Supernatural, Warner Brothers, that whole situation. It's kind of interesting how that kind of works out like that. But nevertheless, basically, he saw something at that time in the woods, but he wasn't really sure what he saw because it's actually something he heard about as a story when he was younger. But obviously, as an adult, it's why would I believe it? And he thought, hey, maybe I didn't see what I saw. Obviously, his son kept bringing it up because it was his son's girlfriend that got killed, and Tom felt responsible. But he was like, I want to talk to her parents because for him, it's she was only out there in the woods because of me because we were out there making out and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting because it seemed like him and his dad had a complicated relationship. The way he's kind of getting pissed at his dad like that was oh, is this supposed to be your stepdad or something? It's no, it's just his straight up dad, which is kind of interesting. I was just also because it seemed like the way he was acting towards his dad seemed more like how a kid might react to a step parent or something like that. Nevertheless, turns out not to be the case, but just trying to protect his son because obviously it's oh, I don't know what I saw and I thought I was crazy, so yeah, he just wanted, because his son was looking for answers, so he gave him that. But then later on finds out, holy crap, monsters and stuff are real. Which, side note, it's kind of interesting because they ended up taking that thing down. And when it ended up getting killed, that was kind of interesting because it ended up turning into a puddle of acidic goo. Because it's kind of interesting because basically it gets so hungry that it starts drooling stomach acid. So that's where all the burns come from and stuff like that. It's pretty brutal. This thing has an endless hunger. That's kind of the whole point because the dude it originally was kind of got hunger, was starving for human flesh. Once you got a taste of it, which is interesting because that did come up because Tom, the son, had actually brought that up of being oh yeah, typically when animals or creatures eat something, once they gotten a taste for it, they kind of come back for it more and more. In his case, it's he ate his family to survive during a harsh winter, so he got a taste for it, kind of drove him mad and everything. And now the curse on top of that made it so that he would forever be hungry, and if he's starving, his body would start devouring itself, hence also the form it took on and everything. So there's that. But the sheriff brought up such an interesting conversation that I think it's good. For a long period of time, it's so interesting. It's obviously Sam and Dean tell only select people here and there. It's never a public thing of people knowing about the supernatural world. He throws it out there. Well, why don't you tell people, let people know what, it's really just up to you to decide who knows and who doesn't know. But is that the thing? Sam and Dean tell people every once in a while, some people get brought into the hunting world. Other people are just people out there in the world who know the supernatural and stuff like that. Obviously, Dean's hey, if we tell people, not most people would believe as hell. You saw something it in the woods, you didn't really believe it. So it took you a while to kind of process all of this. But then Sam, obviously, after the recent experience of like losing all those hunters, it's like even the most well-trained people who know about the supernatural world can't, end up dying from the situation. It's not a foolproof thing that even if you're well-trained, you can't, there's a chance you might die in all of this. And like, Sam isn't all that keen about letting a whole bunch of people know about the supernatural world to leave them vulnerable to it, because they'll try and stop it and end up getting themselves killed. And that's like that's a heavy weight to kind of hold on its own. But that's also like a thing too. That was something I was thinking about, because it's like, well, if you let the public know, the people who do believe, eventually they'll start seeing the supernatural everywhere when there isn't. Like something goes wrong a little bit, they'll just assume it's a supernatural, and that can be a whole issue in itself, So, like I said, also the aspect of a lot of people might try to play hero, trying to do the right thing, and ended up getting themselves and other people killed, But that in itself is such an interesting thing, because I think when the time comes, they might have to like weaponize the entire world of like, hey, you need to know the supernatural world exists, because this isn't just about, killing these monsters and saving other people. It's also about saving yourself and other people, because it's like these monsters, if you're aware of who they are and what they're capable of doing, you won't get turned into a monster that ends up feeding the situations. Like you can protect people against vampirism and werewolf, so they don't have to get turned and stuff like that, protect themselves in that regard, protect themselves from demon possession, dealing with ghosts. Like letting the general public know does have its benefits. And the fact is, I don't know if that's something they've ever really outright discussed in this entire show, is that, like I said, it's just Sam and Dean have told certain people here and there, only because they've rescued said people, so said people know about the supernatural now. It's not like they outright told, but to be fair, they kind of do in the process of them helping or trying to save the day. So the situation comes down to like, hey, you should tell your son the truth. He's your son, and you owe it to him. I tell him about what really went down, so... Which, learning about the supernatural world, being some of the few people who know, has got to be a heavy burden all on its own. Because when Strange, once again, kind of playing into either realm of things, it's like when the supernatural stuff comes around, you might be like, well, you might think something supernatural's come around when in actuality it hasn't. It's just kind of an interesting thing. And it's such an interesting conversation to have, like, will the series ever eventually lead to it becoming public knowledge that the supernatural world? Because a lot of series in this case typically don't do that. Like when it's something where like, oh, there's a supernatural world, it's never public knowledge. The only series I know that's ever gone this far was Teen Wolf, because that blew my mind, that like the supernatural world had already kind of been a secret. It hadn't, like, it's like it creeped in every once in a while, but the general people in Beacon didn't know about it. But, that becomes a plot point later on in the series. So it's just kind of an interesting thing like that. Kind of using another example, like the Vampire Diaries universe. Very few people that normal humans know about the supernatural world, So it's that thing of like because there's a lot of give and take with that. Because I think... Because that's a big thing to kind of deal with, like the general world knowing about the supernatural thing. Like I feel like that's got to be like an end-all be-all type of thing. Potentially, I don't know. You would think it would have come up all the times like Sam and Dean have saved the world, but to be fair, them saving the world has always been kind of an isolated thing in a certain regard. Even though it's been this massive, obviously, saving the world thing, it's always been an isolated situation because it's never gotten to the point that it's a worldwide news situation to a certain degree, So... it's very isolated incidents, even if there's a whole bunch of isolated incidents. Like, no one would correlate and put a lot of that stuff together, So, it's just kind of an interesting thought process that I'm curious to see if that's something they're kind of, like, setting up potentially for the future. Now, another side of this episode dealt with Jack. He meets up with these kids, he's like, oh, we know about Sam and Dean being, like, hunters and stuff like that. And he's like, Jack's like, oh, thank goodness, because he's like, I felt so bad, because I hate lying. It makes my stomach hurt. Like when you have to burp, but you can't burp? He's like that. And that dude, Elliot, being like, dude, he's like, wait, you this and that, all these different supernatural. He's like, Jack, can you be my best friend? And he's nerding out about the supernatural world, and I love Jack. They're like, oh, I forgot what it was. It was like, because they're like, yeah, you should hang out with people your own age. And Jack's like, yeah, well, I'm only 2. And it's like, right, he is that. And he's like, trying to make an excuse. I'm 22. Yeah, 22. And it's like, you're terrible at covering that up. But his story ended up taking an interesting turn, because obviously for him, it's like, these are the first other friends. Other than Sam and Dean, he hasn't really met and had any other friends who are relatively, potentially his own age. At least the age he appears to be. and he's hanging out with them. He wants to show off and stuff like that, because this is the world he's familiar with. And for one, you also got to remember he is kind of a teenager too. So of course it's like you're a teenager, you want to show off the stuff that you know and stuff like that. He wants to be cool and show off in front of everybody, and he ends up using his powers. And he gets to the point like he uses his powers, and one of the girls ends up getting stabbed because they were telling him to stop because it was freaking them out. Granted, he fixed this situation by healing her, but it's still like they're terrified because like, we don't know whatever you are, but stay away from us. And it's sad because for once, like I said, Jack had just made friends for the first time, like outside of just Sam and Dean. And I'm sure it was a reminder of him. It's basically kind of a reminder of like when Dean was afraid of him. Like obviously everyone was kind of afraid of him to the extent like Sam kind of pushed that aside, but Dean was the most fearful of him because it's like, oh, your powers and everything, you're Lucifer's kid and everything. And so for him in that one instance, because it's a situation of he got so caught up in his powers. And this is kind of leading into the reason why Sam and Dean didn't want to bring him before, because like the last time he used his powers and everything, trying to help and everything, trying to do good, a security guard ended up dying. So this is like the second time something catastrophic could have happened. Granted, he's got more control over his powers now, so he was able to kind of help out. And fortunately, because he knows more about kids, obviously, Cassio has healed plenty of people before too. He's seen what angels can do, so obviously he can apply it himself as a Nephilim. But that was a really interesting and sad, it kind of breaks your heart because you're like, oh, it sucks, because it's hard to say. It's like, is it just because of his current situation that led to him doing that? Because it's, he got sucked up into using his powers. Like, no, it's fine. I've got complete control. Because I think after everything, Jack thought, like, I've had my powers for a while. I've tested them out. Like, I've used them in the past. But it's like he's gone without them for such a long time. And I think for Jack, too, it's because it's like, because it's so interesting, because when he didn't have his powers, he felt so useless. And I think now that it's kind of interesting because it feels like because he didn't have his abilities to kind of rely on anymore, it seemed like, he was a little more cautious. But now he kind of like, he's kind of he's getting cocky because it's like, oh, I got my powers back and everything. Like, I can do this, because he felt powerless as a human, but now he's got his powers back. He just wants to show off because he wants to show like, oh, I can do this. I can do this. And it's an interesting conversation because, Sam is like, we need to tell, it's like he owes his son the truth, because it's like, look at you lie. And Dean's like, no, like, Jack said he was okay. He's like, dude, how many times did we lie to Dad to say that we are okay when we weren't, just so he'd think everything was okay? I mean, hell, look at you now. Everyone in that group, you, Cassio, Jack, have all lied to be like, oh, I'm okay, when in actuality you're not, because you don't want other people to worry. Because obviously Cassio's worried because he saw what Jack did last episode, killing that snake, and his justification for it too, hearing it, Jack talk about it. So it's just like Sam and Dean open up and they tell him the truth. It's like, yeah, because we want to make sure you're 100% okay before you go off using your powers, that you can completely control. And Jack's like, yeah, I promise not to use my powers without permission. And and then you can tell it's hitting him hard because realizing, for him, it's like, not only did he do what he did, even Sam and Dean, think that way of like, you can't control your powers. And now it's like, I know I can't. And I think that's also why he was so agreeable to it, because he was like, yeah, because I can't, it's like, and that's going to be a situation that's probably going to come back to haunt him. Like, he might try to apologize to them. He'll probably end up bumping into them, and they'll probably be afraid of him. And that's, once again, it's just a sad situation that has kind of come down to that, because like I said, it's just like Jack has the best of intentions, but it's like I said, I don't know whether it's just a situation of just not having his soul anymore. Like I said, as a Nephilim, you're supposed to be half human, half angel, like that angel side of him, which once again, that's Lucifer's side of him, but maybe that doesn't matter, maybe just the angelic. I mean, angels themselves have always kind of been a certain way, because even Cassio only became the way he did because he was hanging around humans so much. And I guess that's always been a balance for Jack, but without his soul, like maybe it just kind of throws him off balance, even his powers. Like I said, it's kind of out of practice because, before, like, his powers were so natural to him, he didn't really have to think too much about it. It just kind of happened on instinct. Now, well, he got better control of it, but it's like, now it's like he's going so long without relying on them that he has to kind of get back into the swing of things. Because for him, like he said, it feels different. Because before it seemed like it was natural instinct. It seems like now he actually has to think about it and focus on it. And it seems like if he lets things kind of get too out of control, his powers, get out of control. So And that's definitely going to be very interesting to see where all of that takes us going forward. I'm very interested to see like what Jack ends up doing. Will that get to the point like he'll be, he might even be scared to ever use his powers just because of this incident. Like even if like, okay, use your powers, he's like, no. And then maybe he'll tell the truth. Or like I said, maybe Sam and Dean will cross paths with the kids. And maybe they'll be reluctant to say anything, or maybe they'll outright say it, and then they'll find out the truth about what Jack's been hiding. So, like I said, I'm very interested to see where they go with that. But, like, also what I was bringing up earlier, the whole thing about, like, hey, letting the world know about the supernatural world. That's definitely an interesting topic, So, we'll just have to wait and see what the next episode has in store for us. And now moving on to this week's episode of Legacies, a great episode. So much went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We had the conversation going down between Clark and Landon. For one, there's a lot to digest about that too, because obviously I don't think MG's mom knew about the other two locks already being in effect and everything, because obviously Clark hid a lot of that stuff. And what's interesting is, when he's talking to Landon and stuff like that, he's like, no, I'm going to release Malivore with your help. And he's like, oh. And he's like, what? Landon's like, well, I appreciate your help. I mean, I appreciate not your help, your honesty, but still, I'm not going to help with this situation. And I love that he's such a sarcastic, him during the whole story and everything, especially when he was like, a vampire, a werewolf, and a witch. And Landon's like, yeah, I know, walk into a bar and, yeah, I've heard this joke before. And he's like, sorry, you can keep going with your story. But that's so interesting. So it seems like a lot of the thoughts I had about it, because finding out he's a phoenix made me question. I was like, oh, I guess I was completely wrong about my thoughts. Some of the thoughts I had turned out to be the case. I was like heading in the right direction, just not completely. It turns out, in fact, Malivore is in fact Landon's dad. But it's an interesting twist on it, because it's like, not only is it just, it's not necessarily, it is a being, because that was what I thought. I figured if Malivore was a thing, it would end up being some kind of supernatural creature that's forgotten. In this particular case, it turns out it is. It was like a golem that, interestingly enough, was created by the tri-breed of supernaturals: vampires, werewolves, and witches. So basically, at that time, dragons as well as other supernaturals were running rampant. In particular, in this case, it was a dragon that was kind of the issue and everything. But what's so interesting is that now fills in the blank of, once again, I knew it had to be about Hope being a triad that made it so she's the only one who didn't remember. Because the interesting thing is, even with this whole association, even Landon still gets affected by Malivore. Now that's interesting. But Hope, her memory wasn't wiped away. So why is that? Because this Malivore can't harm the three supernaturals that make up what made it. Like, the three supernaturals coming together is what made Malivore. And so her being literally all three, because them individually, of course, it's still going to affect, a vampire, a werewolf, or a witch, but her being all three kind of gives her protection from it, which is interesting. So that kind of finally fills that in, and we kind of understand everything, like especially even how Landon came to be, because it turns out, because obviously Triad didn't just throw supernatural creatures in there, they also threw in other things as well, people. And basically, because so much human DNA existed in it, when Sayla was thrown in there, it eventually spit her out after, her and the baby, because it felt sympathy for her. I wonder why. I guess for her, because she was the only one that asked questions, she just eventually kind of, I guess it was, sentient enough to realize, like, okay, that's why they threw her in there, because she questioned what they were doing. Because it's actually sad too, because we find out, obviously it's hey, Landon and Clark are brothers, which I was like, man, I should have known. I knew they were family. There's part of my brain's maybe they're brothers, maybe maybe he's actually Landon's dad. It's I love it, because I was so close at so many points in times, but maybe I changed my mind, or I wasn't just completely in one direction about something. But it was I was so close on a lot of that stuff, which is so cool. But a lot of the explanations and stuff, this thing being the only of its kind, of course, is going to get lonely. So it tried to create other kids, because it can't actually have kids of its own. And so it created Clark. To be fair, we only know about Clark. What about the rest of his kids that Clark talked about it tried to make? But he did talk about the fact is, each of the kids didn't have its ability. So none of them can absorb supernaturals like it can. And so it also leads to the whole situation of they all had their own weaknesses. So I'm assuming the way he had that conversation go down, either there's some scattered around, or at the very least that they ended up dying because of said weaknesses and stuff like that, which is interesting. If that means that like Clark and Landon are the last of, you know, Malivor's children. I mean, Landon's the only direct blood related one because all the other siblings were created. He's the only one that was kind of born from Malivore in a sense, from direct sense. But it's so interesting because like now we also understand why so his dad isn't even a phoenix. His dad's a golem that has the DNA of a phoenix because he wanted to create something that could live and kind of continue on, and him being half human means that he can procreate, but also making it so that the legacy can go on, the lineage can go on forever. It ended up basically giving Landon phoenix DNA because the thing is sentient, so it kind of figured out like, oh, here's some phoenix mixed with human. Dude, that's very interesting. It's so interesting too because this is all, I mean, it literally fits the title of the show. It's Legacies. This is all about lineages, which is a big part of everything, which is funny because this is about Hope and her lineage, because her lineage is the Michelson family. It's just so interesting, like the layers upon layers, and when you really break this stuff down, it's quite fascinating actually. So now it's a situation of, because I'm curious with Hope's immunity to Malivore because of her being a tri-bred, at the very least, like it wiping people from existence doesn't affect her memory. So does that mean it wouldn't be able to devour her? Because it can't hurt werewolves, vampires, and witches. But my thought process is because Hope is a tri-bred, she's actually a rare species like any other. It kind of puts her in the same category as those other supernaturals that it absorbed. So I think it would be able to work on her because she technically doesn't fall under the category of a vampire, werewolf, or witch, because she's all three. That puts her in a whole new category of supernatural. So she's a loophole around that situation, which with the way things kind of went down in this episode makes me think that might be what we see in the next episode, because the whole situation of like, oh, if you need me to turn you back, like I'm skipping around, but when she told Raphael, if you decide to use the ring and want to go wolf and then you need me to turn you back, find me. And it's like, that seems like some foreshadowing stuff to be like, Hope's not coming back from this in some shape or form. That's at the very least what it seems like it might be alluding to. We'll have to wait and see in that regard. But for, you know, this is, for Landon, this isn't just about like, you know, oh, he got sucked up in the story and everything like that. It's mainly because it's like, no, I want to stop this because basically Triad is trying to weaponize Malivore to make it so that it absorbs, so it will, you know, and to modify it so that it can absorb the other three main supernaturals, vampires, werewolves, and witches. So it's kind of basically trying to purge it. But the thing is, it's so interesting because let's not forget this thing also can eat people too. So there's no protection in that regard. It's so interesting because like this thing was worshipped as a god at one point in time. The descendants who eventually started Triad were descendants of the village people who worshipped this thing because like, oh, this is their god because it got rid of all these supernatural creatures that were plaguing them, and so it protected them. So obviously they worshipped it. But now it's like Clark ended up leading the charge to get with those descendants to go against it, because it's like because for him it was kind of a middle finger to his dad, because his dad threw him away. It was like, oh, I was imperfect. I wasn't what he wanted. I was kind of a failure. So Clark, in his, you know, pissed offness, turned against his dad. And for him, it's like, oh, I picked the wrong side because now I realize Triad is doing, you know, it's just getting rid of people they don't like in general. It's like, oh, I mean, I guess it's like, if there's people who know certain secrets, they don't, like, I guess people can pay off. They're like, oh, I want you to make this person disappear. So, I mean, because who are these people that they're getting rid of and stuff like that? And once again, that's an interesting thing, because he was like, oh, what about your friends? Like, your friends, like, anytime there's a supernatural, they can't get under control. What did they do? They kill it, right? I mean, they pretty much killed everything they've come across so far when it came to fighting it. But it's like, Malivore doesn't kill them. Malivore just absorbs them, so they're all still alive, but they're just somewhere inside still alive. And so that's just an interesting thing in itself. But I don't think Landon seems like he's going along with it, but I don't think he is. I think Landon is only like, obviously he wants to protect the people closest to him, but he knows that doing this is just going to cause problems for everyone, you know. So I think he's playing Clark, but we'll ultimately have to wait and see whether Landon is playing into this, because all the while that's happening, everything at the school is kind of going tits up in certain regards. The whole Josie and Lizzie's situation, Josie's investigating the merge. Every time she finds a book that could be potentially leading to it, the pages are ripped out because he knew at some point in time they might come looking, or someone in general might come looking, and he can't take the chance Lizzie or Josie might find out from said person looking into everything. So he got rid of anything connected to the merge. And obviously Lizzie is trying to make peace with Josie again. It's kind of like, oh, I'm kind of the way I am. Josie will go sulk and eventually we'll kind of make up. But that doesn't seem like that's the case, because for Josie, and she says the line of like, basically, like, I want us to have our own, maybe we don't need to just have our separate rooms, maybe our own separate lives. And you hear the music kind of kick up. It's like, yeah, because it's an ironic statement that you would say that, because obviously she's saying that not knowing like what the merge is all about, being like, oh yeah, you two are going to end up becoming one person that, one of you's going to get absorbed. So it's like, it's just ironic that you would say that statement. So what's interesting though is this episode also showed us when the time comes, well, we know in that alternate reality it was Lizzie that won, but in this reality I think it's Josie that's going to win because she showed herself to be the more powerful sister. I think that's the way we see things kind of potentially going down that route. Essentially, it's kind of sad, especially because Lizzie kind of brought up this, I mean, obviously in her rage and stuff like that, because, hearing Lizzie talk like that was kind of making her spiral. And when she actually, like snaps back at Josie, Lizzie's like, yo, like, it's not just me that's the fault. Yeah, I'm the one that's, this and that, the one that's selfish and all that, sure. But you put up this whole thing of being kind of like the weak, mild sister that's willing to follow my lead. So I'm the one that everyone kind of gets mad at and kind of hates, and but you get to hide who you really are and stuff like that. So it's like, don't just blame me. It takes two people in a situation. And then they both powered up and attacked each other. They were just, and even Josie was like, I'm sorry, just because it's just, they're both hurting and they kind of lashed out at each other. And Hope finding out from Freya, like, what the merge is about. You tell your daughters or I'm going to tell them. And, Lark sits down and finally tells him the sad truth about it. And one thing that has to be thought about, there's no other Geminis left except for one, which I don't see a Lark turning to him, but literally if it means saving his daughters, he might turn to, Kai. Let's not forget, Bonnie locked him up in that other dimension. I mean, I'm sure all they'd have to do is contact Bonnie to find a way into it. Wasn't it Bonnie that locked him up in there? I'm pretty sure it was. I think so. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see if that ends up being the case. I mean, he's the only one they can really turn to in this situation because he's the one that knows most about the Geminis and stuff. He's literally the last Gemini besides, Lizzie and Josie, which that situation is probably going to turn ugly if he ever gets out, because it's going to be like, oh, here's some Gemini twins, and that's just going to be a whole complicated situation. And it breaks your heart because when you see a Lark, he's like, when are you supposed to tell your daughters you can't protect them? When are you supposed to tell your children you don't have the power to protect them? When they're 6, when they're 11? For him, it's just like, I didn't want to tell you until I was ready. And he was like, even now, I am not ready to tell you this, but I have to, because like they're both spiraling because Josie wants answers and Lizzie is just kind of spiraling just because everything going down with her and Josie, so... Like I said, it's that thing of like Penelope did the right thing in a certain regard because obviously these secrets needed to come out. Like, secrets cause a lot of issues, but at the same time, it's like, once again, we know from the alternate reality that because Alaric didn't say anything soon enough, it led to things getting ugly. So, and like I said, in that timeline, Lizzie won. So there's that side of things, which is also interesting too, because we actually think about that alternate timeline. Who was there? Penelope hadn't left yet, just because things kind of spiraled very badly in that alternate reality. So obviously things didn't necessarily play out the same thing. But it's just kind of interesting when you think about it. But other things that kind of bring up, obviously Raphael is starting to black out and lose his temper a lot, because for him it's like the thing that Hope had used on him like 2 episodes ago is splitting his mind between his wolf mind and his human mind. He's kind of trapped between both, and it's just, it's hard to handle. To the point, him and Jed had an interesting conversation, because Jed's like, I wasn't in your situation, dude. I was a dick as a leader. He's like, I'm not doing this necessarily for you. I'm doing this for the pack, because if the pack is following a leader who can't control himself, the pack's going to get hurt. And for him, it's like, don't let your pride get the best of you. Like, learn from my mistakes, and kind of get this whole situation figured out so you can go back to leading the pack fully and be in complete control. So I get the feeling like Raphael is definitely going to play a big part next episode. Like, you know, because when it's all said and done, obviously, like, MG's mom is coming to attack the school. And that's something I brought up last episode, because I was like, I don't know whether, like, they're all about trying to unlock Malivore or something like that. Because I figured it was all about the whole wiping out other supernaturals. I did appreciate it answering, being like, oh, yeah, like, vampires, werewolves, and witches would be unaffected. So... which I guess but it still kind of goes back to what I brought up last episode of being like, that's probably why MG's mom didn't want him to go to the school, because eventually they were going to go after the school, and no matter what the circumstances is, that's still her son. I'm sure she hasn't told the higher ups. I mean, I guess she is technically the higher up potentially. I don't know if she has any bosses when it comes to Triad, but obviously that's why you want to hide your son away, like why you want it such a kept secret that he's up and about, because Triad would investigate, find out he's a vampire, and obviously with you working on trying to rid the world of supernaturals, like you want to make sure your son's the exception. But obviously, because if Malivore's in this state of being a puddle, then they won't have to worry about, you know, because it in its natural golem state would go out, you know, sensing out, you know, a vampire in that case. If it was in its golem form and didn't have the mark anymore, it would go after all the other supernaturals as well, vampires, werewolves, and witches. Then it would have tracked them down eventually. But they plan to keep it in its puddle form so that it could still use it for whatever reason. Once again, we don't know what kind of people they're throwing in there. If there's like higher up government people that's like, we'll pay you to make this person disappear, this and that. Maybe they have their own reasons for doing that. I have no idea. There's still a lot about Triad we still kind of don't 100% know, but we see them attacking the school, which is like, well, the alternate timeline did say that, but I mean, things are different in this timeline. Obviously, this is, you know, truths are all out there and stuff like that. And I get the feeling with this attack coming, Raphael, to lead his pack, might have to go full wolf in that regard to make sure that he's able to have the strength to fight them, because he can't be having a split mind when the school's under attack like that. You had Alaric going to Dorian, because for him it's like, this school's grown so much and it's too important for us to kind of let our issues get in the way. Because even Dorian was like, yeah, my initial reason was to be at this school was to make sure that this next generation of supernaturals could be kept in check, because I wanted the supernatural world to be more in check, because like what happened to his family, obviously, let's not forget Stefan's the reason why his whole family situation played out the way it did. But you know, for him it's like, it's gotten to the point he actually cares about these kids, so he wants to fight to make sure that they're able to live some semblance of a normal life. Once again, it's just a whole aspect, obviously lending itself to the whole Legacies thing, that these are the next legacies of supernaturals, you know, vampires, werewolves, and witches, along with other supernaturals, depending on how that whole Malivore situation plays out. I also really like the Hope situation with her using that prism to talk to Landon, and she's like, wow, just my first time talking to a supernatural hologram. He's like, hologram? What are you talking about? You saying I'm not real? And she starts panicking. He's like, no, I'm just messing with you. She's like, geez, don't do that. He's like, come on. I do appreciate that it does act like Landon, and it's just kind of like trying to teach her, like, hey, you need to face what's there in your head. It's so interesting, too, because she's like, I did it to protect you, so you could at least cut me some credit there. But he's like, no, you didn't just do it to protect me. You did it to protect yourself, because you were afraid of losing me, because you had already lost your mom. You already lost your dad. She couldn't suffer losing another person. So that was her main reason for keeping that secret, because she was afraid, like, you know, she has kind of abandonment issues in certain regards, just because of like her family and everything. So she didn't want to lose another person. I mean, she literally almost broke down seeing him die in front of her. And so she ends up telling this Landon the truth, that, you know, she thought she was, like, past it and everything, but obviously, you know, she wasn't. And now she admits, like, you know, but it is still true that everything I did because I care about you. I love you. And he's like, whoa, you didn't mean for that to come out, did you? And he's like, wow, you say that and it's not even the real me. She's like, I don't know, I'm just winging it here. And I just love that little moment between them. And that actually helped her figure out, like, oh yeah, like, that the whole situation with, you know, Landon's call, there was more to it, his message. Even getting Roman to help. That was interesting. Oh, I almost forgot to talk about the fact that for her, it's like, she feels like, oh, I like, you know, she feels like almost like a cosmic abomination, because for her, it's like, every time she loses someone, for her, it's like, it's all my fault because I shouldn't exist in the first place. I mean, let's not forget, literally, her aunt was trying to kill her when she was still inside of Haley. That was well, No, I got that wrong. I'm just remembered. It was actually her grandmother, Esther, that was doing that because it would mean that her sister, Esther's sister, would come back. You know, Hope's great aunt. Is that what that relationship would be? I think so. Yeah, I'm thinking wrong. Her great aunt would, or still would it just be? Either way, the whole specifics of it doesn't matter. But nevertheless, you know, which actually kind of puts her and Landon, makes her and Landon more in tune with each other because they are even more rare. Because it's like, not only is he a phoenix, he's also the only blood relative of Malivore. Hope is not only the son of, you know, a crescent wolf and Klaus Michelson, the hybrid original. You know, she's also a witch, you know, because she's Esther's, you know, grandchild, and just all of that. Like, she's a tribrid, and it's so interesting because if anything, you can make the arguments like, technically speaking, she feels that way. Technically, Landon's kind of like a cosmic mistake too, because like the golem Malivore was never meant to procreate. It was never meant to create a new lineage of supernaturals, which is its whole point. So, dude, there's so much, dude. I am so excited to see what goes down in next week's episode, because next week's episode is the season finale. Things are going to get crazy. Like, obviously, Hope and them are going to try and save, you know, Landon. Obviously, MG's mom is going to be there. Let's not forget the super squad is getting put together, because obviously, like, Lizzie and Josie are going to be helping, which is going to be complicated, especially them dealing with what's on their mind right now about the whole merge situation. MG's going to be there because his mom's there. That's definitely going to be a very complicated reunion. Can of worms, geez, and obviously Caleb's going to be there, obviously to back up MG. That's just, dude, things are going to get wild. Like I said, I think things are not going to end well, and I think for the person it's not going to end well for is Hope, considering the fact is, I think we're going to have a situation where we might have Hope go in there, and then maybe at the very end of it, she ends up getting spit out by Malivore, and it's like a time frame has passed. Because let's not forget, Clark was like, oh yeah, he was in there for decades before it spit him out. And even Sayla was like, I don't know how long I was in there. I was under the impression they had said she was in there for 2 years, but the preview at the beginning was like, she didn't know how long she was in there. I thought they said 2 years, but maybe something came up that said she was in there for 2 years. Where the hell did I get the number 2 from? Maybe they said, I don't know. Either way, I'm so excited to see how this season wraps up. It's going to be crazy. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.